I'm Rowan, I'm with Hillingdon Library Services, I'm a library assistant and I'm incredibly excited to be interviewing Antonia Honeywell today. The Ship is an incredible novel. It's a dystopian novel set in a near future London that explores ideas quite close to home. Pollution, financial crashes and bees dying are all things that permeate this novel. I absolutely love reading it and I definitely recommend you read it yourself. So The Ship is your debut novel.
It is.
What was your experience in the run-up to writing and publishing it?
I've wanted to be a writer for as long as I can remember. I wrote my first novel when I was 8, when we were each issued with a little notebook, and I filled mine with the existential angst of a small plastic counter on a Snakes and Ladders board. It never got published. I knew then that I wanted to write. I was beginning to understand then that writers were real people and that putting words on paper was what they did. I thought they were all dead. Over time, I came to understand they were real, living people and that was how they earned their money. And that's what I wanted to do too. It took a good decade from making that resolution to write properly. A little tiny thing that needing to earn a living got in the way. So I trained as a teacher. I loved teaching, that was the problem. And the fact that I really loved the work that was meant to only be keeping me going until I wrote stood in the way of my writing. So it took me a good 10 years to make the full commitment to writing. And another 10 years after that to actually produce something that anyone wanted to publish.
Did you set out to write a dystopia or did it just kind of happen?
I didn't set out to write a dystopia per se. What I did set out to do was explore how one might negotiate a world in which everything seems to be going wrong. I wrote the novel 3 years ago now, but a lot of the things that I wrote then seem to have been prescient. You see a lot at the moment on Twitter and social media, in conversations with people, wanting to get away, wanting to feel, a world in which Donald Trump is President of the United States is not one in which I feel massively comfortable. There's a lot of things been happening in British politics over the last few years, culminating in Brexit, which have made me feel profoundly uncomfortable with the way things are going. And I think there is a human instinct to want to pull up a drawbridge and make safe sanctuary with people that you agree with. People, good, decent human beings, because of course everyone that agrees with you is per se a decent human being, and not have to worry about the nastiness, the unpleasantness, the people who refuse to see things the way they are. The dystopian part of The Ship came from needing to create a convincing world from which someone would want to escape, from which a father might want to go to the ends of the earth, quite literally, to keep his daughter safe. It's more dystopian in the tradition of, say, 1984 or The Handmaid's Tale, where we're looking at things that are going on in the world now that are deeply concerning, than in the tradition of Blade Runner or Total Recall, which are taking new technologies and looking at where those might lead us.
You chose to navigate this very terrifying world from the viewpoint of someone who's very naive and sheltered.
I think it's a truth that the people who survive terrible social upheavals, economic upheavals, natural disasters, tend to be the ones with the money. If I was going to write about someone who was going to survive this very challenging world that I've created, it had to be someone with resources. The world of London in The Ship, told from the point of view of someone without those resources, would have been a very different story and would more than likely to have culminated in their death.
Yeah.
I needed someone who was going to survive, so that's why she's very privileged. But the flip side of that is that the privileged, the people who are protected in some way, have the gift of a very clear sight if they choose to use it. I wanted my protagonist to be in the place where her sheltered upbringing gave her a clear sight on what was going on around her, rather than a blinkered one. She doesn't know herself how privileged she is, and I think that gives her, if you have always known where your next meal's coming from, and you know what the world's like, you'll do what her parents do, which is not ask too many questions about your meal and where it's coming from. But my central character is naive enough and takes her privilege for granted enough to be able to say, I've got food on my plate, why hasn't that person? And those are, I think, the questions that privilege should be asking.
Why did you choose to use the British Museum, and kind of what does it represent for you within the text?
The British Museum's absolutely integral to the novel. This novel started off as an idea. It started off with me with a very, very young family and a very, very sick husband, and the financial crash coming, and just showing how tissue paper the division was between the security I was enjoying and the penury that would be on the other side of a crash in this world. So the story came from how could anyone create an environment in which their children could be kept safe. You can't do that on land subject to government. If you go off and find an island and set up a new civilization, you're going to be fighting nature and hostile weather conditions. And nothing's easy. And the idea of this cruise ship in which everything is automated, everything is stored, there's not a huge amount of work to be done, people free to explore books and music and art and all those things that we all love and don't have time for. I had it kind of floating around in my head, but I had no story, I had no character. And then I was in the British Museum looking around, and I saw this girl through a display case, bored out of her brain, busy on her phone, clearly resenting the fact that she was there at all. And I thought, you're surrounded not only by this wealth of the civilizations of nations, but somebody has cared enough to bring you to look at it. Why are you not interested? What's going on? And I realised how irrelevant all that was to her world, her concerns. I thought, there she is. That is my central character. And at more or less the same moment, I realised that what I was thinking of in my vague idea was the end of an era, the end of a civilization. What is this particular era in the development of mankind? How is it going to end? And back in the 80s, we all thought it was going to be nuclear war. But I don't think we believe that anymore. We're going to destroy ourselves. And what is that going to look like? It's not going to be a great big bomb. It's not. It's going to go slowly, and it's going to be quite painful. And I realised that what I was standing looking at in the British Museum is the rise and fall of nations. The ancient Greeks, the Romans, the Mesopotamians, they all had the Incas, they all had their big moments at which they were the dominant race, the way of doing things, and they all came to an end. And that's maybe what I was thinking of by introducing the British Museum in it. I'm looking at maybe not, how something ends.